welcome back to Party Trick Astrology. I'm Nina.
I'm Shaina.
And this is the end of the long Lilith series.
So we've officially now done Lilith through the sign and Lilith through the houses. And also just a quick side disclaimer, I'm so sorry if you can hear the dogs out there.
And we also have a video on what Lilith is, her whole story, what's her deal, and all of the different Liliths and what they all represent. But for this series, we are doing the Black Moon Lilith, which can be referred to sometimes as the mean Lilith or the true Lilith. In reality, both of those Liliths are the Black Moon Lilith, just different ways of calculating it. So sometimes you have it in different signs as well. So you could have multiple Lilith videos to check out. I mean, multiple. In signs, houses, all of that good stuff. So please peruse the down bar. There you will also find where to get readings from me, from Shaina, our separate channels, our separate socials. You are really busy. Let me tell you that. I'm so sorry. I know if you're a Lilith in the 12th house, you're like, no, please don't give me things to do. I just want to float off into the abyss. But listen, resist that Lilith urge and check out the down bar.
I think a big thing with Lilith in the 12th house is that with Lilith in any of the other houses, it's going to be shown some way. It's going to show up somehow and it's going to be expressed. But with Lilith in the 12th house is everything that we can't see, that we can't physically touch, that may or may not actually be there. And so with Lilith in the 12th house, it can really feel like, as the native with this placement, you can kind of feel like you've pushed almost like your Lilith out of the way sometimes. Like it kind of just lives within your subconscious and it can kind of really feel like this dark subconscious obsessive part of you. And I think a big theme of Lilith in the 12th house is denying your Lilith, possibly because, you know, those Lilith qualities were shunned or, you know, thought of that as bad or negative. I think of like a real world example is like if you're around a mother that calls women whores a lot. You know what I mean? I feel like that's the kind of energy to push Lilith into the 12th house. Like, oh, I don't want to be this. There's this judgment on this Lilith-like quality and I'm going to push it away and push it down. But it never goes away, does it? It just sits in that little subconscious.
Yeah, that's what's interesting about Lilith in the 12th house. Obviously, whenever you're looking at Lilith in a house and how it corresponds to Lilith in the sign that rules that particular house, you're going to find some similarities. Like I brought up cheekily at the beginning, you know, Lilith in the 12th house, like Lilith in Pisces, has these escapist tendencies. You know, that is the itch that you want to scratch to get outside of the real world and dive into this 12th house of subconscious. You know, it's sort of one of those things where Lilith is living in your subconscious. So because the subconscious is not conscious, you're not going to see your Lilith very often necessarily, but once you dive into the realm of the 12th house, which is the house of undoing, the house of getting lost in the sauce. Once you get in the 12th house, if Lilith is present in there, it can be very difficult to not go into the undoingness of the 12th house. And what's interesting about comparing Lilith in the 12th house and the 6th house, people with Lilith in the 6th house, to contrast, have their Lilith just present all the time in their mental state. It's something that can really rule their everyday life. And the 12th house, it's not necessarily at the top of your consciousness, but because it is in your subconscious, it is always lingering there. Yet despite that, I think that the most important thing to note about Lilith in the 12th house is that as present as it can be in you, in your subconscious, there really is a lack of identifying with that Lilith because it is not present in your consciousness. If it was in the first house, your whole identity would be very much painted with this Lilith light. If it was in the sixth house, it would be chasing you every day with everything you do, so you inevitably somewhat identify with those Lilith qualities. But with Lilith in the 12th house, there's this sense of, perhaps like Shaina said, like, shun that dark feminine aspect away from you. Maybe that you're not allowed to hone in on your own dark feminine, your own inner little crazy feminist, you know? So it gets particularly tricky when you have something like Lilith in the 12th house conjunct the ascendant, because in that case, it's still a big part of your identity as far as how other people perceive you and what other people put upon you, but it doesn't feel like you're consciously making that choice to step into that identity consciously.
Yeah, like I feel like either some people feel extremely blocked from expressing any Lilith qualities, or they may not even realize that they even have any issues with Lilith at all. It can feel like this Lilith in the 12th house placement comes more from past lives or past family karma than it does directly your childhood, because we've talked a lot about the feeling of Lilith starts with this exile feeling in childhood. I think with Lilith in the 12th house, it starts in the womb. It starts before your life has even been started. And so a lot of the issues are passed down issues. So there is probably a lot of, you know, could even be secret family history of addiction or escapism, you know, the themes of the 12th house. It can be really hard for a Lilith in the 12th house to want to do anything other than, you know, eat, sleep, and have sex. Especially having sex with Lilith in the 12th house is a way to escape. It's a way to run away from their problems, to run away from life. Extreme daydreaming is very common. Also having really horrific nightmares, or even I think of just like maybe just off-putting deja vu experiences, you know, like, ooh, I feel like I've been here before. I feel like this is some weird karmic connection. And because it's the 12th house, it's like these little things that happen. It's always like, is this real or is this not? It's always riding that line, and it can be hard to figure out what's just happenstance and what's actually meaningful.
Yeah, another way that the exile experience can happen with Lilith in the 12th house is just being exiled from being able to tap into your subconscious. People perhaps engraving this narrative in you that tapping into your emotions or into your past is something that you shouldn't do, that you should stray away from. Or potentially, you know, with Lilith in the 12th house, there can be instances where you're not aware of any exile experience or any trauma necessarily that you've gone through to keep you from being able to access what Lilith has to offer, but because perhaps something happened in your childhood or at some point in your life where you've blocked it out and pushed it into your subconscious, that even creates an exile from you being able to purposefully dive into your subconscious and figure out all of the stuff within there, like repressed memories. A traumatic experience can happen in your life to where it blocks you off from being able to experience the full depths of your mind and memory.
I think that people with Lilith in the 12th house kind of more understand and know that they do have a very addictive personality, and they are very scared of it because it's Lilith. Whereas I think Lilith in Pisces leans more towards that romanticization and idealization of drugs, and that's why they go towards it. I think Lilith in the 12th house can really have a fear of these things and a fear of becoming addicted, a fear of becoming dependent, maybe because they've seen this happen in their family before, or they know it's happening in their family. That's why I think a lot of times with Lilith in the 12th house, it gears towards either having that complete dependency and just swimming in it, or completely avoiding it. Lilith is all or nothing, so it makes sense that those are the two flip-flops. But I think it is important with Lilith in the 12th house to acknowledge what's there and to try to heal that.
Right. It can just be something that's so overwhelming that to acknowledge it at all feels like you're going to inevitably dive into the deepest, darkest despair of that. Hence the 12th house, known as the house of undoing, where you lose touch with reality because you're going so deeply into things that are not in touch with reality. And that doesn't always mean drugs, you know? That can mean sleep, that can mean just losing touch with reality by spending too much time in your head, imagination, books, even TV shows, anything especially with a fantasy element where it's not something that's very rooted in the real world, or more so something that takes you out of the real world. And I think that both the wanting to abstain from drugs and wanting to dive into drugs have sort of the same purpose in its root sense, where if you are abstaining from drugs, you're abstaining from something that can potentially expand your consciousness and take you deeper into the subconscious and the webbings of your mind. And if you go into drugs, you're going so deeply into this land that is far away from reality that you're not actually addressing the real issues within. So the thing with when you're dealing with trauma or difficulty accessing your more deeper subconscious emotions, you do have to find a happy medium between avoiding going there and going so deeply in there that it becomes destructive. Of course, Lilith does not know happy medium. Lilith does not know balance. Lilith is all about the extreme, which makes sense because of the nature of Lilith not having a healthy access to the energy that she's in. She's going to come from a lack mindset of, if I let this go, if I don't stop, I might have to go back to that feeling of not having. So truthfully, it's a matter of, interestingly, coming at things consciously rather than letting Lilith fully guide you from the belly button into the house of the undoing completely, right? And I always give sort of the advice of detaching from the messages of Lilith, acknowledging her as sort of a little gremlin on your back rather than letting her be in the driver's seat of your life. I will say, it feels really nice to get Lilith to be in that driver's seat. It feels really nice to get that responsibility out of you and just be like, oh yes, haven't you ever ridden that streetcar? Take me down to my desires. Let me have what I want from this guttural impulse. But long term, that's not the healthiest thing you can do.
Yes. And also, the 12th house rules love affairs, but specifically more secretive or more scandalous love affairs. Or even like, is it a love affair or is it a hidden enemy? And with Lilith in the 12th house, there can be a thing where you escape from these scandals, you escape from these love scandals or whatever's going on in your relationship life by convincing yourself they're not there. And with Lilith in the 12th house, the propensity towards having leaked secrets is very high. Who knows? Maybe you might be the person to leak somebody's most private secrets to try to get the leg up. Your Lilith is not a nice, friendly energy. And so this can really cause a lot of paranoia and, you know, build up a lot of resentment. And I think that these people can always kind of be afraid of their secrets being leaked or something about them being exposed. And I think that that can make them very private sometimes.
That fear of secrets being leaked, or even the propensity to have your secrets being leaked, comes from the fact that with Lilith in the 12th house, there is a fear with getting to know your own secrets. There's a fear with getting to face what is actually going on within you and the truth of all of that. So if you're not comfortable with the deepest, most secretive parts of you, there's naturally going to be a fear that that gets taken out of your control and released to the public, especially if your Lilith is conjunct the ascendant. There's also sort of a poetic justice of, hey, if you're not going to face the deepest parts of you, we're going to force you to by making it public knowledge.
Another thing with relationships is that with Lilith in the 12th house, there can be a real feeling that not only does, you know, life not live up to your fantasies, but also, you know, the individual sometimes can feel like they don't stack up to your fantasies.
Right. And I think that there's even a propensity with Lilith in the 12th house to sort of fall in love with fictional characters.
Yes.
And have that be more comfortable for you. And that can definitely veer into obsessive territory, and it can detach you more and more from reality. So it can feel like, oh, I'm 12 years old and I'm on Tumblr and I love Danny Phantom,
yes.
right? I don't know.
Yeah.
But then it can just snowball from there if it's really Lilith activating that.
Because it's specifically Lilith, I feel like the reason why they may get so into these fantasy characters is because you can control what the other person does in your fantasy. You know what I mean? Like, you know, it's Lilith. It's controlling. It wants what it wants. And so maybe sometimes if it's a real person, like, they can go off and do them. They have free will, but in your fantasy, they don't. They're, you know, things are as you want them to be, you know? I think, and it also avoids real world consequences, having to actually get up and do anything in real life, you know?
And I mean, that in itself is a secretive love affair.
Yeah.
It's the nature of the 12th house is for love affairs to be secret, to be hidden. And that's just a poetic way to fulfill that, to be with someone in your mind who isn't even real.
Yeah. And also, like, speaking of the whole, you know, Lilith wants what she wants, and, you know, might not give you the same respect. With Lilith in the 12th house, what I think can sometimes happen is maybe that Lilith in the 12th house person feels as though they can push through your boundaries and, you know, become really close to you. They may have a lot of problems putting down their boundaries because it's Lilith, you know, and she wants control over her 12th house. She doesn't want to give up control over that house, but yet she wants control over your 12th house. And so there might be some unfair boundaries that come up. Or sometimes Lilith can always go the complete opposite way, and this can be an extreme martyr personality who just always gives everything up and can't help but want to be saved and taken away and rescued, and has a lot of trouble at all constructing boundaries and doing things for themselves. But either way, there's going to be some kind of issue with boundaries, and who knows, maybe the Lilith in the 12th house person will go through both throughout their life, you know?
Yeah, we talked a lot about sort of a victim mentality when we talked about Lilith in Pisces, and that can definitely also come up with Lilith in the 12th house. And the reasoning behind that is because, well, Pisces is very passive, but the 12th house doesn't even exist in reality. It's all about the subconscious. So when something as sort of brooding and manipulative and controlling as Lilith is sitting in the 12th house, that energy has a hard time manifesting itself in the real world, in real life. So the thing with, like, victimization of oneself is that you are powerless. You are not in control of taking action and changing your own life, changing your own circumstances. So that Lilith in the 12th house can lend the native to be really brooding internally, but not take any practical action to change that. You know, not do anything to actually stand up for themselves, like Shaina said, set boundaries or bring confrontation to the real world. And so all of that brooding energy becomes passive and becomes more of a victim mindset than allowing you to empower yourself, to stand up for yourself, set your own boundaries, change your environment around you.
Yes, and I feel like also because their Lilith is in the 12th house, they might have issues where they really deny it. And so sometimes I think with that buildup of paranoia that Lilith in the 12th house can have, they can wind up being dominant without even realizing it, you know, without even meaning to. I'm not saying always, but I feel like because Lilith, the 12th house is a very emotional house, if this person's having some kind of emotional outburst, they're going to have that emotional outburst. And there's nothing that can really feel like there can be much control over it. And sometimes that can wind up kind of having somebody being a little bit more domineering because their emotions will take precedence over whatever else is going on in that situation.
Yeah, what that makes me think of as well is that perhaps you have a hard time validating your own emotions because they're happening in not the real world. It's like, are my emotions valid? Are they real? Can I bring them into the real world? Can I actually stand up for myself, set boundaries for myself? I mean, Lilith is a node. It's a shadow planet, so it can be hard to discern what is real and what is an illusion with Lilith in general, because Lilith is nonsensical, Lilith is non-practical. You know what else is nonsensical and non-practical? The 12th house.
With Lilith in the 12th house, there's obviously a little bit of an odd relationship with spirituality. I actually noticed in the celebrities, most of these people were brought up in a pretty strict religious environment, which makes sense. Lilith is very controlling. Lilith is very obsessive. And a lot of the times, you know, the religious environment that these people were brought up in is one that preaches more of the, you know, scare tactics side of religion instead of the, you know, love and light and hope sides. Usually these people were taught more of the, like, you know, what is that stupid line? Like, if you have sex, you're gonna die from Mean Girls, you know, like that kind of vibe might have been what you were introduced to. So, you know, there can definitely be a major rebellion against traditional religion, against what religion you were brought up with, possibly. Although I would say that these people are pretty spiritual. They're not religious, but they are very usually spiritual.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that religion and spirituality are actually extremely, extremely different, and even the fact of someone growing up in religion is restrictive to one's actual understanding of spirituality. Because the 12th house type of spirituality is boundless. It's like nothing is right or wrong, non-judgmental, that sort of thing. Whereas a lot of religions come at spirituality in a form of, well, actually, we're going to take sort of nonsensical, more fantastical concepts and attribute a right and wrong to them and attribute rules and guidelines to them, where the 12th house is not about that. It's not about finding right or wrong. It's about gray areas. It's about non-judgment, and true spirituality is about, you know, being non-judgmental, and a lot of religions are extremely judgmental. So even being in religion can be an exile experience from real spirituality, which the 12th house represents.
That's true. And, you know, like you mentioned, the 6th house and the 12th house are opposite to each other. A big thing with Lilith in the 6th house is, you know, obsessively seeing this line of right and wrong.
Like, I don't think that you see many correlations between Lilith and Virgo or Lilith in the 6th house and, like, murder, because there's this sense there of like, that's right or that's wrong. And if there is a correlation, there is probably like a twisted opinion of what is right, like, or what is wrong.
Military, you know?
Yeah, and it's like, it's justified with logic somehow, even if it's nonsensical logic, even if it's not very logical logic, it's justified with some sort of logic. Whereas if you look at, you know, Lilith in the 12th house, that's much more likely to almost like accidentally get into some very nefarious things, whether it is, I don't know why I brought up murder. I don't know why that was the first thing that came into my mind, but very nefarious things because there's just a lack of boundaries around what is right and what is wrong, or there's just a total abandon of that concept of what is right and what is wrong, and even a denial that consequences can reach them because they're so far off in, you know, their own world, detached from reality.
Yeah, and that actually brings to kind of like a disclaimer about the 12th house, or at least this placement, is that the whole point of it, as we keep on mentioning, is like you aren't sure if what's real. And because Lilith is so dominating, these people are going to a lot of times act on these unconscious or subconscious impulses or, you know, needs or desires that may be a little bit taboo or just all out kind of wrong. And they can have a lot of trouble sometimes, I think, taking responsibility for those things, because it can really feel like, you know, already Lilith can sometimes feel like it's not us that is doing it, like it's some other entity that's like, why must I obsessively do this? Like, Lilith already does have that tinge to it. And the 12th house already does have this tinge of like, what's going on? I'm not in control. I guess this is just what's happening. And so they can really do things and not understand and almost kind of be disconnected by the fact that they're the ones doing it or that they're the ones in control. And it's always going to be so hard to draw that line. Like, a lot of people that I was looking up with celebrities were people that did crimes and then pled insanity and were by the professionals deemed not mentally fit. And that was a common theme.
Yeah, and interestingly, one thing that comes up a lot when pleading insanity in a criminal case is trauma and the fact that their subconscious is acting out. They don't mean to kill that person, they just happen to fit certain characteristics, or some trauma seems to come up of like that person reminds them of someone that abused them or something. So that's really the subconscious acting out and literally like imagining something out of reality that's deeply rooted in the person's history.
It still is like having a fantasy. It's just like very dark. It's not like you're like, oh, this person's a magical fairy. You're like, oh my god, you know, it's Lilith. So it's like, oh my god, this person, you know, subconsciously looks like this, and it's bringing that out in me. Yeah.
And it's an unwilling fantasy because Lilith is in the driver's seat instead of you. It's not like, let's pretend that everything's okay. It's like, let's pretend this innocent person is your dad.
Yeah.
Let's kill him.
Yeah.
One thing that we don't bring up a lot in these Lilith videos is sometimes how Lilith can react with Sinistry. But because the 12th house is the house of soulmates and hidden enemies and sort of love affairs and just like having Lilith in there, when people have certain things conjuncting your Lilith, those planets are going to fall in the 12th house. So anyone who has anything prominent in the 12th house is more likely to experience sort of soulmate connections, relationships, and hidden enemies as well. And so by having Lilith in the 12th house, you are likely prone to have a very specific kind of soulmate, love affair, hidden enemy situation. And it's really that kind of haven't you ever ridden that streetcar experience where you are detached from your sense of logic when in a relationship with this person. Perhaps you can get into love affairs, soulmate connections where there is a lot of manipulation and gaslighting involved, where there is something inappropriate in the relation that keeps it hidden, like age differences and whatnot, and just things that sensibly you should be able to say like, whoa, that's not okay. Let's not do this. Let's not be in a relationship with this person. But Lilith takes a hold and just like drags you by your belly button into this kind of relationship, and your sensibilities don't take over your heart, your gut, your intense desire and craving for that kind of relationship takes over. So that's always important to note that when dealing with 12th house relationships, they are going to have a Lilith tinge to them. So you might find that there's more of a propensity to have a hidden enemy rather than a soulmate, or a karmic partner rather than, you know, traditional saying your vows at the altar soulmate that, you know, culturally we've sort of adopted soulmate to mean. You're more likely to have more of someone that can bring a lot of stress and detriment to your life, but in one way, it's always exciting, you know, a little bit, you know, like, haven't you ever been in that street kind of situation, right?
Yeah, I feel like with Lilith in the 12th house, like how we mentioned, like I kind of brought this up at the beginning, like Lilith in Pisces is, I feel like, romanticizing the drugs and the, and the save me. I feel like Lilith in the 12th house more romanticizes secret love affairs and relationships and like how could I say no to this person even though, you know, there's an age gap, or, you know, I'm married, or, you know, they're halfway across the world. How can I say no to this person when this person can fulfill my fantasies? Especially if a planet's conjunct that Lilith, like this person can fulfill this and Lilith cannot say no to that. And so I think that's interesting because I do feel like Lilith in the 12th house, at least the people that I know with Lilith in the 12th house, are more like, you know, I really have an addictive personality. I got to keep that on lock. But love, you know?
Yeah.
So now we're going to go into celebrities with Lilith in their 12th house. Let's start out as light as the Lilith in the 12th house celebrities get, I guess. Not very, but Lindsay Lohan has this in Gemini. She is a childhood star. She obviously had a lot of alcohol and drug problems. She even has a famous mugshot. I've seen it on t-shirts. Her father was also somebody who was in trouble with the law a lot and had substance issues, which, as we mentioned, there's a lot of times inherited stuff. And I even read something once where she was talking about how she was like, this is in my family, this is in my bloodline, I've always known about this. Her parents had a pretty turbulent relationship. They separated when she was 3, but then they reunited, but then they separated again like in 2008. So they kind of went back and forth, and I feel like even that can create like a, oh, even when relationships are bad, they can like still be fixed, but then they're not, but then they still can be, but then they're not, you know?
I think it's also interesting that because she is famous and has always been, there is this sort of sense of, well, my consequences will not catch up to me. She has a lot of mugshots. She got sentenced to a lot of time in jail, and I'm sure that she paid some consequences, but a lot of things she did get away with and didn't get the full consequence for her actions. And it's natural that a Lilith in the 12th house wouldn't.
Yeah, avoiding consequences, like getting away with a lot of stuff, I think is a huge Lilith in the 12th house thing. But I feel like the Lilith in the 12th house will always be like, I always have to deal with my consequences. Like, I feel like they'll think the opposite, but everybody around them is like, you're okay.
Well, it goes back to sort of like the victim mentality of like, you feel like you're dealing with so many consequences because you're not taking responsibility for it. So it's like, oh, I have to do community service, I have to go to jail. Oh, feels like so many consequences, but it's actually very logical that if you break the law, you get community service or you go to jail. You know?
It's not my fault because this is my Lilith in the 12th house doing it, not me.
Yeah, or even, it's in my bloodline, it's in my family.
Yeah. And that, again, that's that line of like, well, there are parts of that that are valid, like, but then also it's like, but you have to take responsibility. Oh. And Amanda Bynes has this as well in Taurus. Didn't she kind of have a similar thing?
1000%. I think I know a bit more about Amanda Bynes and her mental health history, and she's had lots of diagnoses, schizophrenia, I think. There's one story of Amanda Bynes where she is on probation or something, and some police officers like go into her apartment because they think that like she has weed, and apparently she dropped a bong out of the window because she knew that people were coming, and the bong just disappeared. It never like broke on the floor. No one was ever able to retrieve the bong, but like they know that she had it. People saw her like throw it out the window or something. You would see her deny constantly, like, I'm not on drugs, or I'm not doing this, or this isn't really happening. Lots of body dysmorphia.
Yes, that was a huge 2000s thing too.
Low-rise jeans. That's one thing that might have created a lot of body dysmorphia in the early 2000s.
Yeah, it's coming back, so full circle, man.
Yeah.
Somebody else who has Lilith in the 12th house is Mac Miller. I don't know too much about him, but he's a rapper, and I mean, Lilith in the 12th house can definitely point towards a lot of creative talents. There were a lot of actors, a lot of actors on the list, and it makes sense for there to be a lot of musicians on the list as well. It's a very highly creative position. If you're living in your fantasies all the time, you can make something of those fantasies, you know? You can put them out in the world, and that can be a very positive way of transforming your Lilith in the 12th house. But it's still Lilith in the 12th house, and Mac Miller unfortunately died of a drug overdose.
There's a creative genius in there. There's an ability to tap in intuitively to things and tap into your own wisdom. So much so that it can be overwhelming and that you can want to escape it with drugs, whatever. I don't know much about him either, except for that he was dating Ariana Grande, and then she got with Pete Davidson. And
what's her 12th house? What's her Venus? She has really weird taste.
Yeah, she might have something in the 12th house that's taking her to these like tragic men, honestly.
Oh yeah, because wasn't it like when he died, everybody was like, Ariana Grande did it. Like, didn't everybody try to pin... Dang.
Yeah, because it's like Ariana Grande broke up with him, and then she got with Pete Davidson and was like engaged to him. So kind of their relationship was being accused of putting Mac over the edge and like drug overdose or killing himself, you know.
That was a common theme. Many people with Lilith in the 12th house, they were like, they had just gotten out of this horrible love affair. They had just, you know, had their heart broken. They had a string of bad lovers. Like, that was a common thing I read, like right before they passed. Eminem has this in Scorpio. I didn't know much about him, but I looked up his life because I was like, there's stuff in there, I know it. And I guess his mother nearly died when she had him, and she had like a 73-hour labor, and the 12th house has a lot to do with the womb, with labor, and so having your mom almost die and have a very painful, arduous birth is very indicative of having a harsh 12th house.
We talk a lot about how Lilith represents the dark feminine and what that might mean for your experience with your femininity, and men and women have masculinity and femininity with all of us. We all take a man and a woman to create us, so our mothers endow us with sort of our sense of femininity, and the fact that his experience with his mom almost dying in the process of having him could create that subconscious dark feminine association, this sort of relationship with his feminine coming from that and from the subconscious place, from life pre-birth, you know, endowing him with those sentiments or with that understanding.
Yes, and I think this is so Lilith in the 12th house, okay? He talks a lot about how his mother suffered from this thing called factitious disease imposed on another, which is basically like
Munchausen.
Yes. Like,
is that Munchausen by proxy?
Yes. She would basically convince him he was sick all the time, and also she was addicted to Valium, and she would sprinkle Valium on his food as a child so he would get addicted, so that she could be like, you're addicted to Valium, you're addicted to Valium, and ignore her own addiction problems, which is absolutely horrible. Obviously, I think his negative relationship with his mother really impacted his view on females, because I have never liked Eminem because I think he has a lot of really sexist and a lot of really, you know, rapey lines. His Lilith is in Scorpio in the 12th house. Armie Hammer has this in Gemini.
I do know his cannibalism stuff, and I did look at his chart and I was like, yeah, he would.
He's a cannibal too? Okay, because I put Ed Geen. Ed Geen is also a Lilith in the 12th house, like the most famous cannibal, like if not one of them.
I mean, it's unclear if Armie Hammer is an active cannibal or just a cannibal on the inside. Yeah, he's expressed, you know, the desire to to eat his lovers, or at least a little nibble, a little toe of theirs or something, and it really comes off as like a possessive nature. I remember, yeah, looking at his Lilith, and it went, because I looked at his chart because I was like, we gotta check this out, way back when that was like hot news, and I was like, yeah, there's something there. It's in Gemini. He played the Winklevoss twins in The Social Network, so that's an interesting connection. You know, Lindsay Lohan played twins. I know we're not talking about Lilith and Gemini, but
still. And they're not twins, it's in the 12th house. It's like their twin is locked away. It's like made up, it's fictitious. Funny enough, Geen also literally has this in Gemini, so they have the same Lilith placement. I don't know. What?
Oh my god! Conspiracy theory time, put on your tinfoil hats. 12th house, Gemini, Lilith Cannibals. Is this repeating that they ate their twin in the womb and now they want to eat people?
That's true. That's interesting. I don't know. I would love to know. Geen also has this in Gemini. He's known as the Butcher of Plainfield. And basically he was a body snatcher from graves, and he used the corpses to make different things or eat them. Disclaimer, not everybody with Lilith in the 12th house is going to be a fucking grave snatcher, okay? Definitely not. Just want to put that out there.
And not everybody with Lilith and Gemini in the 12th house. So far, what the data that we have on this is 2 out of 3. Lilith and Gemini in the 12th house will be cannibal.
Well, we don't know what Lindsay Lohan's done, you know, behind closed doors. I'm just
That's
kidding.
true, but with the information that we have right now. But there's also the fact that, you know, a reason why the 12th house has to do with soulmates, hidden love affairs, is that the 12th house is all about synthesis. There's no like individuality in the 12th house. Case in point, the fact that it rules the womb, and there's literally no individuality in the womb. So there might be some cannibalistic tendencies or sensibilities when you have Lilith in the 12th house, because there's this desire to assert your dominance over someone else and create synthesis between the two of you. And that's really what Armie Hammer was displaying when he was like, I wish that I could cut off your toe and keep it in my pocket to know that I can always have a part of you. It's just like a really twisted way of wanting to create synthesis with another person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And Geen was one of those people that was raised in a very religiously fervent household, the kind that was like, death and everybody's doing everything wrong. His mother would always say that every female, apart from herself of course, was instruments of the devil. So he was definitely taught, you know, women, females, they're all bad, and your dark femininity is bad, and it needs to be shunned, and it needs to be repressed. And basically when he was tried, initially he was found unfit to stand trial. After a while he was found guilty, but he spent most of his life at a mental health facility and then died there, which is very Lilith in the 12th house.
Yeah, there's also something to the point of like when you grow up, or some people, when there's this Lilith influence telling you that like everything is bad and hellfire and brimstone and all of that, I'm sure that there can be a connection there with Lilith in the 12th house of like, well, if everything is innately bad and horrible, even just like any human tendency is horrible and bad, like sex is horrible and bad, there's really no option to be good if I'm a human.
Yeah, it kind of absolves you of that responsibility, because you're like, well, I'm just gonna be bad, so might as well be bad. Not my fault. Speaking of which, this unfortunately goes really well into the next person. Somebody named James Egan Holmes has this in Leo. He's the person that shot up the movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. He also grew up in a Lutheran church, very strict, and he suffered mental health issues throughout his whole life. He was always frightened by nail ghosts, which is ghosts that would sound like they were always nailing the wall. He would see shadows that would fight each other. It was very violent. He had this breakup with his girlfriend, and this very much contributed to his violence. But it sounds like the relationship was very short and he like didn't know her much. It really feels like a Lilith in the 12th house thing where he fantasized and put all this stuff on this person, and she was like, nah, you're kind of a little unstable, and then it just pushed him further, basically. And he tried to get out of it through a plea of insanity. Very Lilith in the 12th house, you know, I'm not responsible, I'm insane kind of thing. Let's move on to somebody that's a little bit more positive. Emily Dickinson has this in Scorpio. I mean, her life probably wasn't the easiest, but she's a very positive figure in American literature. She was not really known during her life. She did not get famous for her poetry, which poetry is very 12th house. Her poetry had a lot of themes of Scorpio, a lot of death. She wasn't famous until she died, and her sister found all the poems and made them public. So her Lilith stuff, her thoughts, her poetry, her passions, they were not exposed until after she passed.
Yeah, she was extremely reclusive, staying in her own mind, and really, her poetry is incredibly passionate. There's a lot of just like passion and love in those poems, which is interesting when you juxtapose that to her lifestyle of being incredibly reclusive. It really indicates that a lot of her romantic life or her passionate love affairs were secretive, maybe even were mostly occurring in her imagination.
Yeah, she was never married, and she was known for people like coming over and then her just like going upstairs and closing her door and like not socializing. Let's talk about Trisha Paytas. Trisha Paytas has this in Virgo. She is somebody who I think very much exploits mental health. She's always romanticizing her life. You're never sure if what she's saying is true or false. She says really ridiculous things, and she may even lie about things that you really couldn't even imagine somebody would lie about. And she even has trouble keeping track of her lies and her life and what's true and what's not. It's all very convoluted. She is obviously naturally a spiritual person, but she is always kind of going around and attaching herself to different religions, but only on a very, what can this religion do for me? How can this propel my fame more? Which, I mean, obviously the fame stuff has more to do with the rest of her chart, but this can kind of be indicative of that.
Yeah, definitely. The whole question with Trisha Paytas is like, first of all, is she a troll? Is she not a troll? Is she conscious of being a troll even? Is she not conscious of being a troll? Is she manipulating? Is she just mentally ill? A little bit of both. Like, we're so confused about what exactly is happening. And she's also demonstrated very addictive tendencies.
J.K. Rowling has this in Capricorn. I mean, Harry Potter. It's all about magic. It's a book about magic. I don't know. What else can you say?
It makes sense that it's in Capricorn. You know, it's a very thriving career that she's made off of this. But also, it's plenty of people write books about magic. But this has an intense community of people who also want to go into the world. It really goes to show just the incredible world building that she was able to do and the legacy that that created that makes other people just obsessed with it as well.
Do you know that TikTok craze that originated from Harry Potter? What is it called? Like shifting? It's the most Lilith in the 12th house thing ever. Because it's all about like, oh, I go to a different dimension and I shift into the Harry Potter world. It started as Harry Potter, now it's branched off into everything. But everybody's like, this is just daydreaming, but it's like Lilith in the 12th house. So it's like intense daydreaming, like, no, I was really there. And it's like, where's the line? What are you talking about?
Right, there's more questions of like, is it real? Is it not real? Do they think it's real? Are they trolling? You know?
Yeah! And it all stemmed from fucking J.K. Rowling, this Lilith in the 12th house bitch. Yeah, that is all these celebrities with Lilith in the... That's all of the celebrities with Lilith in the 12th house. There are no
more celebrities exist with Lilith in the 12th house.
And I think that is all we are going to talk about for this Lilith series. And if you've watched all the videos in the series, you are the MVP. Thank you very much for your support. As we mentioned at the beginning, we have a bunch of links below. We sell birth chart readings. We also have personal astrology YouTube channels, as well as TikToks, merch, newsletter. You can find it all down below.
But thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you over on our separate channels. I think that's all, and thank you especially for sticking it out through the rambly bits. I'm bad at saying bye.
Is this the beginning or the end of the series? Is this the beginning or end of the video? Ooh.
Time is an illusion, so maybe it's nothing. There is no beginning, there is no end.
What if it just went black at that point? Like, that was it?
No. Maybe I'll do that, and then I'll put you saying at the end, what if it just went black?